So David, here we are recording. This in fact is the last official recording of the Transfield history to complete the 60 years and the time that takes us to really a new beginning, a logical ending of a period of industrial activity. The arts continue but change in the way we support it. But more importantly, you know, we've got a huge body of knowledge, experience, great projects that we were involved in, ones that we feel extremely proud to have been tied up with and have made a difference to Australia, mainly Sydney, but all across Australia over that period. So you joined us, and it was a very left field situation at the time in 1989. You were in government at the time. You might want to talk about that and how I was looking for somebody to help me build the project development team. I'd just come back to set the scene from Brisbane, having been the managing director running our Queensland division of Transfield Construction, and Marco asked me to come back and set up this project development team, which then went on to do 10 years of very successful major projects around Australia. But you came in really with your government expertise was the key thing.
Who was the headhunter that you'd engaged for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish you'd asked me that before we started recording. I can't remember, but I remember I could see his face, but I actually can't remember his name.
Me too, and that happens ever more often with me these days. Yeah. But I'd engaged him to help recruit a number of people in government. As you know, I was Director General of Transport, and under the Greiner government, and Baird as the Minister, Bruce Baird, father of the current Premier. Bruce wanted everyone replaced, and I was the last one to be replaced. I lasted about 18 months, but I'd used Gary
Reedy. That's who it was. Gary
and
Reedy.
I'd used Gary Reedy to recruit the replacements for grain handling, maritime services board, state rail, urban transit, RTA, all those things. And then when it came time for me to depart, he got in touch with me and asked me if I was interested in him putting my name forward for Transfield. I didn't know much about the only part of Transfield that I had any involvement with was the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, which was a controversial project. It was a negotiated project that Laurie Broughton pushed very hard. And my minister at the time was Ron Mulock, who was from Western Sydney, and he had the shits with Broughton because Broughton kept doing things for non-Western Sydney people. So I was put in an awkward position of having to advise on the Harbour Tunnel, which I thought was a great piece of infrastructure, but my minister didn't want it. So that was a nice little path, and so I had a little bit, just a small bit to do with Transfield on that. And the Libs hated it. They were in opposition. Greiner said he was going to stop it, and then on about the second day he was in office, I got called down and he told me I was staying in my job, but that I wasn't to take any notice of all the pre-election rhetoric about the Harbour Tunnel. He thought it was a great piece of infrastructure too, but he'd promised to have a review on it, and my job was to find a legal firm that would say it was impossible to undo the contract, which we did. And so just a little bit with, passing with Transfield. And one other bit was there'd been some very big floods in Western New South Wales, and a lot of bridges had got washed out. And the head of the what was then the Roads and Traffic Authority came up to see myself and Bruce Baird as Minister and said, there's all these bridges are washed out, the roads are closed. Transfield's offered, they've got ready-made bridges that can replace these things and they can start tomorrow. And Bruce Baird went off his head about a non-negotiated contract and he couldn't do this, this had to go. And I was just shaking my head at how this worked. Anyway, we did a very hurried tender process and they didn't start tomorrow, they started about a week later. And then...
and we didn't get it, Transfield didn't get that work.
They didn't. I thought you got some of it.
Oh, we might have got a little bit, but
yeah,
didn't get
it had to be shared around to keep up appearances, which delayed, of course, replacing the bridges, but anyway. And so, as I say, when I finally came unstuck with Bruce Baird, Gary Reedy spoke to me and said he thought there was a good job going and mentioned my name to you, and we had I went over for an interview and I think we started talking about 4 o'clock and I don't think we talked about the job at all and noticed that it was dark outside and we both rang our respective wives in a panic because we were both supposed to be home, and you said, well, I guess this means you got the job. You remember that?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. We'd spent a lot of time. And it was a left fielder, and Gary mentioned it to me and I said, well, I'm not sure. I mean, this guy's got no construction experience, he hasn't done anything in, he's very deep in government, and it was, a partnership that's lasted, gosh, 89, that's more than 25 years, David. It's been a long time.
That's right.
We're still here, still talking.
Yeah, and it was, it was project development, and I think I earned the nickname Dr. No pretty quickly, because I think there were about 24 projects on the list to be looking at.
Which would have been right.
And I looked at them and thought, 22 of them were absolute bullshit and we should get rid of them, and that was, having come from the grind of government, slashing costs and get rid of this, get rid of that, where those sorts of things were welcome. It was an interesting introduction with my colleagues.
Yeah.
But then we really got, I think the first real focus was on the water sector.
That's right. Yeah, and in Macarthur were the first projects we did in joint venture.
It was clear, because it was very clear to me that, having come from government, that there was a real shift going on, that governments were in the business of outsourcing in a genuine way, and that there were going to be quite a few opportunities in that area. And we selected a joint venture partner, Northwest Water. We went through a list, and I remember my approach to that was a bit different because it wasn't a construction. We didn't need a construction joint venture partner. This was this was operations.
That's right, and it ended up, it was the next authority and the utility in England.
Which I knew would be what the government was looking for, because they would want that comfort, so that worked pretty well. And we won that. We won the Macarthur project in Sydney, both of which were very successful in every respect. And they went on to be part of Transfield infrastructure when services listed, they went with services, and then they hived off that Transfield infrastructure.
But more importantly, David, that was really the beginning of this alliance arrangements that happened between government and private sector. And that hasn't been replicated again, unfortunately, because that was actually a bit of a golden period. Government entities were actually quite happy to seriously explore a proper partnership between the private sector, and they did it well. And
and genuine risk sharing.
Yeah, that's right. And the projects, some of the projects that were built were some of the best probably built in the country in terms of program, budget, and final quality.
And longevity, and that worked,
right.
and those things. And that was, and I had very early involvement with the Melbourne CityLink project when it was, when the Victorian government was trying to weigh up whether to do it themselves or put it out to tender and how it would be. And it was around that time that Tony Shepherd got back involved with.
Well, Tony had been with us and then left us for 2 years.
Yeah.
Set up infrastructure. What was it called? His business.
The bank.
No. It was an infrastructure advisory company. That he set up with Glenn Fraser and Mike. Not Mike Roach. Mike. What was the other? Michael somebody. Anyway, so the three of them got together and set up this company. Then he came back. And he really focused on Melbourne CityLink, and that became his project, and a very successful one as it was in terms of the scale and the complexity. And just for the record, I remember that in the early days before the project was actually tendered, there was sort of like a committee of Melbourne that were looking at this, and we joined that committee. And originally the government had sort of named this thing the Melbourne Bypass project, and then they added all these different elements to it where there were multiple bypasses, so the thing got nicknamed the Multiple Bypass Project. It was a time when the heart surgery was just getting to that level of complexity, so it was funny. But anyway, the Melbourne CityLink was one of the...
One of my most enjoyable parts of participating in that was when right at the end of the negotiations and you were meeting with Kennett, and he quietly told you that we had the job. And he also mentioned that they were still looking for a major sponsor of the Grand Prix. And he couldn't have made a remark to a more susceptible person, you with your Formula One and Grand Prix interests. And so you launched and said, right, we'll sponsor the Grand Prix.
The very first one in Melbourne.
The very first one in Melbourne, or Transurban.
Transurban.
Under Transurban. Transurban would sponsor it. And of course he came back and my jaw dropped, you know, at the same time as it's being announced that Transurban is the winner, we're announcing that Transurban's going to sponsor the bloody Grand Prix. I remember saying, Guido, you've only got two choices. You can look corrupt or you can look stupid. Which one's it going to be?
Stupid.
And you said, stupid will do. So we went down to Melbourne and we rehearsed you through that press conference.
That's right.
Which was the most intensive rehearsal I'd ever seen, and I'd seen quite a few with ministers in government. And for an hour, we had about 6 of us bombarding you, trying to trick you up. And I think after about 58 minutes, you stuffed up a question. And I said, that's it. It's all right if he can go 58 minutes. It was terrific. And
I remember the session, but I don't remember not having stuffed up. I remember just being under intensive pressure.
We put you under, I kept saying there's no point answering properly and sweating at the same time. You can't sweat and answer the question. And you did. And then when it came out the next day, it was all good. Why did Transurban do it? Well, in common with the Grand Prix, it was all about getting from A to B in the fastest possible way.
It was a logical step.
Logical, and everyone sort of...
but it was.
And it was.
It was.
We
actually,
did it.
that part of it was.
And we...
It was actually no corruption involved in it. It was a simple you know, it happened. We happened to be in the right spot at the right time, and this was the right thing to do. And the government needed help, and we had a big project where we needed to communicate a complete story of something that was completely unknown to people. We had to list a company that was supposed to, you know, raise. Gosh, how much? We raised a lot of money. We raised 500 million, I think. It was a big amount of money. And I remember there was another chapter, of course, to that, which was Macquarie Bank, who were our advisors, who didn't want to put a cent into it, into the capital raising. And I had to go and talk to Alan Moss and basically bend his arm hard to get him to put some money in. He did. And no sooner than when it listed did Macquarie sell out their complete stake virtually at the opening cost, you know, the listing price.
Which proves that even they can make bad mistakes.
And it took them another year or two when they finally then piled back into it, having sort of almost doubled in price. And that set Macquarie on the whole path of their whole infrastructure business, which is another story.
And then we were
of success for them.
then we were kicking off the airport rail link in Sydney about the same time,
That's right.
and that was, and I was very involved in that. And that was tricky because that had to be a negotiated project, which Baird in particular had sworn he would never do. It was outrageous to do a non-competitive tender deal. And not only had we had to get him to agree to do that, but it had to be with the same bloody company that he had the shits about with the Harbour Tunnel, Transfield. And so there was no point me talking to him. So you remember, you know, and it was one of the reasons we enlisted Bob Lease, who very sadly passed away just this last week, because Bob was in the Liberal Party, and so you and I would talk to Max Moore-Wilton, who saw the sense of it, very clear thinker, also saw the sense of why I couldn't, because I'd recruited Max into the New South Wales government, into the Maritime Services Board, and then he took steps there. So that was very successful, but those two projects, one we made very good money out of the construction, Airport Rail Link, was very good on the construction, and we lost a shitload on Melbourne City Link on the construction. We lost our equity on the Airport Rail Link, and we made a lot of money on the equity in Melbourne City Link. A very exciting, very
exciting times they were.
Yeah,
it's a pity we didn't make it on all sides, on all projects. We'd probably still be in construction today.
Yeah, probably. Well, yeah.
So
it was.
But you know, getting back to New Southern Railway, David, that was a very interesting project, because you might remember that we were pressured to bring on Peter Wills to join us as a partner.
Oh yeah, that's because he'd put in a stupid. The government said they couldn't do this with negotiation without having an expression of interest.
That's right.
And he put in an expression of interest for a bloody using the old goods line out to Botany,
which is
anyway.
The rest is history there. So we made that partnership work, no matter, and notwithstanding the fact it was very difficult.
Well, that was the deal that the government. He was a big donor to the Liberal Party, so they couldn't piss him off. So they told us we could do it, but we had to get them in.
That's right. So we found a way to do it. I remember spending an extraordinary amount of hours on the telephone from Perisher Valley on my very few days of holidays I'd have a year, take the family down skiing, on the phone. I still remember sitting in the corridor on the phone having these long conversations with Peter Wills about trying to get the appropriate matching between the two of us, and that was a very tough ask, because he asked for a role that he was completely incapable of delivering. And you know, we had to sort of find.
He wanted to be an equal partner, and that wasn't going to work.
And it wasn't going to, because you know, he came from a property background, and this had nothing to do with it.
And you were in Perisher, and I can't remember whether I actually told you beforehand. I don't think I did, because I thought you'd go to Wardo. So I went to Paul Salteri, And I said, I'm going to go. Remember Peter Wills wanted to bring Balderstone Hornibrook into joint venture with us, which would have been a bloody disaster. We needed Bouygues, and we did need Bouygues for the soft ground.
Yeah, for the technical capabilities they had for the drilling, the tunnelling.
We had never done that
type
sort of thing.
tunneling.
That's right. And Wills was insisting that it would be Balderstone, and I talked to Paul and said, if it's all right with you, I'm going to go and tell Peter that's not on. And when he says, well, there's no deal, I want to be able to say, right, there's no deal, we walk. I don't think I told you that beforehand because I thought you'd be worried. And it got to that with Peter Wills.
Yeah.
And he looked me straight in the eye and said, well, if we're not in there with Balderstone, there's no deal. And I remember internally quivering and looking him straight back in the eye and saying, well, there is no deal. Even right now, I can feel my throat tightening up. I said, there will be no deal with that. So if that's the point, I'm off now. We'll communicate in writing this afternoon. And he said, no, don't be so hasty.
You call the bluff.
I said, Peter, there's no compromise on this. We are with Bouygues, we are not with Balderstone, and you've been cut into the operations, and that's it. And the thing in the throat went, and I got all because he blinked. We had a lot of pleasurable moments in Transfield, but that was up there with him.
But the project then went on, and we had one of the great project managers in this country,
Claudio de
Berardino, who brought that project in on time, on budget. And it was an extraordinary job because it was a very, very complex technical job, and not many people would realise that.
No.
When they travel in the train to the airport, they have no idea. But more importantly, David, the commercial deal that we did with the government was an extraordinary one, and in reflection, what a pity more like that are not done, because what a collaboration it was, with Treasury recognising the tremendous uplift they were going to get from the property activity and sales as a result of creating this new corridor through those.
And did you read recently with one of the new, I don't know whether it's with WestConnex, the Treasury is now actually formally putting in real estate value capture. Because remember we talked to them about that, and they said it was just too hard. They would just do it through the uplift in stamp duty from the increased residential and sales. But the great tragedy, of course, with the airport rail link, which is still tainted with failure.
From our perspective.
Oh, well, a lot of and in government, was that crunch period coincided with that early 2000 period. We'd really hit the ropes. The Transurban thing had cost a fortune. We had no money. Remember that? We were in
dire straits.
Absolute dire straits. And State Rail had really screwed up running the trains. And the contract that we'd negotiated with them had us covered for that. But of course they fought like stuck pigs. And the bank, remember the NAB, that guy, the Scottish guy,
Andrew, what was his surname?
I don't know, I don't even want to hear it.
That's right.
I don't even want to hear it.
That's right.
What an arrogant shit.
Yeah.
He wouldn't hear about that, so we were foreclosed, we were out, and then his underlings sent our case to Mallison's, which we'd already talked to, who said it was good, and 3 years later, they settled out of court for $120 million.
When we were only asking for 20 to solve
Or 40, or I can't, whatever.
Number, it was a lot less.
Yeah, it was a lot less. And it just, once again, it's just so critical not to run out of money. If we'd have had the money to pay the bank and hang in there and pursue that claim, it would have been seen very differently.
Mm. Yeah, it would have changed our fortunes a lot at the time too, because the project, we exited with a significant loss to having lost our equity. But eventually the actual value of that part of the contract was right
the
up
receivers,
there.
The receivers sold it for, I mean,
they made a fortune.
The NAB loaned $200 million. They used all the bloody penalty interest rates and blah, blah, blahs to get it up to 240. And remember that Westpac fund paid 252 for it.
Mm.
I mean,
it was a good deal.
It was.
Anyways, we don't have to.
In contrast to Brisbane, the Brisbane Airport link, which was a basket case in patronage terms, but the bondholders and everyone hung in there, and it was eventually sorted through.
That's right.
It was just completely arse about. It's the one that should have.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so that was still, we've left a tremendous project for Sydney. The greed of government and developers has been seen in Waterloo and Green Square and that area, because there is so much density there. There's not a tree.
Which we predicted. Because night follows day.
That's right. So government must.
Remember, we signed the agreement saying we wouldn't buy land anywhere along the thing.
Yeah.
That we had to do.
What a stupid thing that was to agree to. Huh?
Well, we had to. That was
part of the deal.
That was part of the deal. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, remember, we did say that's how the government would make their money out of the value capture. So I mean,
and they did, and they did in spades. So then that project is marked a tremendous renaissance, if you like, of activity in that area, that wasted industrial area between the city and the airport. But then, not long after that, actually contemporaneously before that, we've actually jumped, David, because our activities in Thailand and in Laos through the Nam Turn 2 was actually before
That's right.
New Southern Railway, and we've actually skipped over that very important chapter where you spent 2 years of your life, but didn't improve one word of your Laotian. Through that 2 years, although probably at the time you learned a few words. But what an extraordinary project that was.
Turn.
2. That's right, Nam, turn. And
Savadi. That's about it.
Yeah. Do you remember when we were one of the first foreign countries back into Laos? It's closed its borders for a long time. And in the early 90s, John McGarry, who's unfortunately not with us any longer, identified that at one of the donor conferences with the World Bank and the Asian Bank and all those guys, and this project, which was set to scene, it ended up being a 900 megawatt hydro project on the Nakai Plateau, and this plateau was able to capture so much water. It was ridiculous. The value of the water passing through a turbine, and really made the country. In fact, the GDP of Laos was going to be extended by another 25% through this one single project. So you can see the importance of a project of that scale. And we joined with EDF, the great French utility, Électricité de France, and we had a good relationship with them. I think they were very professional and very equitable as partners, notwithstanding their tremendous size.
I still have a lot to do with Thomas Philippe.
Yeah, project manager assigned to it. And then we joined with the Thai company. Remember that he was actually...
Ital-Thai.
No, that was a construction company.
And
but there was another
Jasmine.
Jasmine, which were really into communications.
Telecommunications, yeah.
Right. So we had a very odd mixture of partners. But that project, which took the better part of 9 years or more, 11 years of development before it started, that was an extraordinary amount of time.
Yeah, we threw a fair bit at it. John McGarry, Hans Fisher, you,
me, that's right.
Brian McElroy,
that's right.
who joined us from Melbourne Water. He was up there for
a long time,
a substantial period.
We didn't have the legs to stay with that project, and when we finally...
Well, that coincided with that period where we just we run out of money, and I remember Marco getting cranky that we were still trying to do things with it. He said, walk away from it. And we said, no, we'll get some money back out of this. And he said, well, if you'd just like to pay all the expenses, you can keep all the money you get back out of it. And we didn't have the guts to say, all right. We got 15 million back.
That's right. Which is all the development capital we'd spent over the time and a bit more. And it was a very good... well, you know, we'd left a legacy there in terms of the work we'd done and set it up and strategic vision of it, and it was finally completed by EDF. And
that's been remembered and whatever in all the World Bank stuff. I mean, I got involved mainly because it involved, there'd be no project without a World Bank political risk guarantee, and the World Bank was this big government type bureaucracy. And so McGarry, and his fairly straightforward and non-complicated approach to life, said, it's a bloody complicated government type bureaucracy. Iverach, you're the person around here. You've done all that sort of stuff. You can go and sort that out. And you said, oh yeah, that's a good idea.
And you did. You did a good job. Got us to that position. But you know, I think we can still be very proud of the, you know, just simply having identified it, worked with it, set it up, got the partnership going, and really helped Laos make a tremendous transformation into the future. So I imagine, I haven't been back to see, but I'm sure the project.
I remember the government invited me up for the opening. At a personal level, that's probably particularly the social impact work we did and the planning for that is probably the most satisfying I've been involved with because it worked. And I mean, it was the world's most controversial project when I went up there because the people that list these things decided that there was no point making Three Gorges the most controversial project because there was no chance of stopping that. No way the Chinese would stop that. But they were confident they were going to stop Nam Turn.
And they tried.
Because the World Bank had said they would fund no more hydro projects. They'd had a disaster in South America and a disaster in Portugal. And so, so we had to get them to change their mind. And it became the exemplar of what to do. So I'm very, very satisfied with that.
And so it should be.
Yeah, it was good.
So let's then move back to the 2000s, because we've been talking about projects all in the 90s, and we had a very successful run in the project development area, which you and I were running in or working in Transfield Holdings, Transfield Proprietary Limited. But then we had quite some difficulty because Marco recommended we separate our businesses from the Salteris, and that happened in the mid-90s. And that really also reduced our firepower and our balance sheet significantly. I think in hindsight that was the wrong thing to have done. We should have stayed together. We would have ended up being one of the great industrial companies.
I always thought the best combination was you and Paul. Very complementary attributes. Much more complementary than Paul and Marco. In many ways, much closer to what I envisaged or imagined the relationship was between the two founders, your father and Paul's father. And just about everything that you and Paul were both involved in and agreed on worked well.
You know, I get on with Paul. I still regard him as a good friend. I see him regularly. I saw him at Bob Lisa's memorial. Had a good chat to him. So, and they went on and did some wonderful things with the defence business.
Yeah,
congratulations to them. But
but of course that period. I mean, the 2000s was we've skipped over what was probably the most, in some respects, the most important stuff you and I did, which was push for however long it was, 2 years, to get Transfield maintenance, or I think we called it to start with.
Yeah, Transfield maintenance, that's what it was.
That became Transfield Services. And you remember, we had 3 very strong independent chief executives of construction and
we had George Thomas and Bruce, and then David Baker.
And the guy in the Melbourne, the shipbuilding.
John White, yeah.
And all of them had attributes that could be pulled into a Transfield Services or Transfield Maintenance, and all resisted like hell. And we fought that and eventually got it set up. And we told the board at the time we reckoned it'd turn over 500 million within 5 years. And
it's better than that.
Well, no, I think it failed. I think it got to about 450 in 5 years, and then in the 6th year it was 680.
Yeah.
So
right.
it was.
Yeah, but when we listed it had a 700 million turnover in 2001. Yeah, but that was a start. In 93, when we won that contract from Melbourne Water, which then really set Transfield Services onto a potential path, which was called Transfield Maintenance.
Yeah.
That period really of galvanising and finding a whole new market, as you have just summarised, all that internal bargaining which went on. But eventually we won it because Transfield Services was finally floated with the tremendous life and uplift. And
it was terrific. And remember when we were putting that bid into Melbourne Water, because McElroy was still in Melbourne Water at that stage, and he just quietly said to me, I know you guys can do this work, but the board will never give it to a construction company. It's maintenance. So we did all this preparation, and then the night we put it in, we whited out Transfield Construction. Remember, it was Bruce James. We whited out Transfield Construction, and we put Transfield Maintenance. And Bruce said, Marco will have a fit, there's no such thing. I said, look, if we lose, he won't know. And if we win, we'll just tell him we had to do it in order to win. Anyway, Guido thinks it's a good idea. So we did it.
And that was it.
And
the rest is history.
That's history. Yeah.
That's history. It's those simple things like that,
yeah.
Which made the difference. Being bold and often not doing what you're supposed to do or told to do, which got
the number of times we were told to bloody stop work on the airport rail link was. I mean, Jerry Gleeson used to make a joke of it.
Yeah.
I think the last few times he said, "Well, you've been told to stop work again." He said, "I don't even want to hear what you're going to actually do."
Yeah. Yeah, but it wasn't just the New Southern Railway, it was Walsh Bay. Walsh Bay, which we're sitting in here, the product of a tremendously successful project, which you didn't have much to do with, but I spent a lot of time with Tony, in fact, Tony Shepherd.
And Tony did it. Because that was in parallel with Nam Turn. I mean, when you think about what the team was doing, we had Walsh Bay,
New Southern Railway, Melbourne City Link,
Transfield Maintenance on its way.
That's right.
Nam Turn,
Airport Rail Link, Air Train,
and to top it off, the best alliance of them all, the Northside Storage Tunnel, the Olympic project that was never allowed to be called an Olympic project. Remember, just had to be done before the Olympics in case there was a big storm and all the shit washed into the harbour and affected the triathlon or the sailing.
Correct.
But it wasn't an Olympic project.
No, that's right.
Because there was a budget for Olympic projects and that had been reached.
Yeah.
That was
good. But that was a great project
great.
as well.
And that's where we really saw what Charles Rotier could do. And we still have an association with, with Charles.
In the next chapter.
Yeah. The
Another
project got into a bit of strife, and he was on the leadership team, and he said, I think this is so important, I'll stop being Managing Director of Montgomery Watson and go full-time as Project Director.
That's right. That's right. That
And
was
he did.
A big call, and he did, and he made a huge project, made a huge difference to the project, as he still does, and it's great to have that association. So we had a very active 90s. In the 2000s, then, when we had separated from the Solteri family, and then Marco, we had the big arguments with Marco and finally settled that down. We then basically went into a new phase of Transfield Holdings, which was more aligned to a private equity company, where we were investing our capital in new projects.
Well, and we
had new businesses rather than projects.
Yeah, and we had trouble with Transfield construction. Construction was going through a bad phase in Australia generally, but that really demonstrated to me how hurtful it is when senior management is distracted with non-core issues. And every one of us had been incredibly distracted with the Marco split. So the eye was off all sorts of balls, and so it was an unprofitable time for construction. I remember we used to have the monthly meetings, and just about every bloody thing was red ink. It was horrific. And people had been allowed to develop their own modus operandis and all sorts of things. Remember the brawls but it was all exacerbated by it being a tough time in the market anyway. So that was a hard time, and we had to get out of construction, and we floated services to enable the Marco
to enable us
thing,
to pay back the banks and get out go forward.
And for Marco. So it was a dramatic change in the company.
Yeah, and he insisted that we sell construction.
Yeah.
And remember, I tried to do a joint venture with a number of parties,
Yeah.
Bouygues, Italian company, Improgillo. We even talked to the Thais.
Yeah.
We talked to John Hollands and Thies. In the end, it was John Hollands that bought us, because Wald didn't want to have a joint venture. He said, we buy the whole thing or nothing. And that was the only way out. Great pity, because then there was a golden period of construction for the next almost a decade, where we left a lot of money on the table. But that was the way it was, and we got onto a new activity, and we built very many interesting businesses. We got involved in renewable energy, we got involved in university accommodation, student accommodation.
Charter Hall.
We got involved in property funds management. And a lot of it very successful, and it was a good period.
And some losses. Alternative energy things that
didn't work out.
Didn't work out.
No.
I was just saying to Michelle yesterday, and she just said, yeah, way too far ahead of our time. Yeah. I remember Bill O'Neill, who's always been a very wise counsel. One of his favourite sayings was, be first to be second.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we were first, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of fun trying to do it, trying to make it work. But who was to predict where the world was going to go after the GFC? Who was going to predict that the politicians of the world were saying in 2007 that the greatest moral dilemma we face as a race on this planet is how do we deal with climate change? And then no sooner did the GFC come in that all of a sudden the politicians realise they have a much bigger problem than climate change, which is still going on around us, and they're still trying to fix up their balance sheets.
And through all that period, we still have our participation in Sydney Harbour Tunnel. Still a very well run business.
Ironically, you're still involved in the committee of the Sydney Harbour
That's
Tunnel,
right.
which you were asked when you were in politics to try to find a way to undo it and then
That's
keep
right.
it.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
one of the great ironies, isn't
Oh
it?
yeah, no, I love it.
Dine out on that one all the
I
time.
love it. Yeah.
All right.
And the other business that went through all that amazingly well run and a great privilege to be part of was Perisher Ski Resort.
That's right, and you spent a lot of time on that.
Well,
and it was a very successful joint venture with the Packer family for 20 years or more.
Yeah, and
What a great relationship that was.
so, quite interesting. Right now we're looking at all sorts of funds and people who look for investments that can go through thick and thin, and we've been right up close involved in a couple because both those businesses were terrific through that period. I mean, obviously there was wasn't Perisher's best season with the GFC, but it still made money. I mean, it's just when you think about it.
In the best or the worst seasons, it always made money.
Yeah, and that was very much due to the way the management.
Yeah, what a fabulous management. One of the best management teams we've probably seen in any of the businesses we've owned.
Yeah.
And Peter Brucelau is just absolutely first class.
Yeah.
And we wish him well in his new journey with Vale, that great American
he'll do well. And
resort company. That
we must catch up with Ashley too, because he was
instrumental in identifying people and training him,
which is incredible, a remarkable achievement. For a guy to be able to identify and promote, knowing that he would be seen to be better than he was. That's a tremendous ability.
Great guy. So we've had good fun, but it's not over, David. This chapter of Transfield has come to a logical conclusion, although Luca and I continue to invest in it into the next chapter. We've got our own separate activities, and I look forward to utilising all the lessons, all the learnings, all of the skill, the cunning that we've had over all those years. We've got to be able to do something useful with it. So we'll see if we can take the legacies of 60 years of Transfield into the next chapter of our lives.
Oh, yeah, it'll happen. We just, the frustration at the moment is we're not sure where. So the thing we've got to be careful of is, remaining patient.
That's right.
Which is not
easy.
Not one of your characteristics, and it's really not one of mine. I'm a bit of a mixture. I can be very patient when I'm certain about what the outcome's going to be.
Yes, but how often does that happen, though?
But I'm not very patient if I can't see the route to the end.
That's right.
So we'll just have to work on that.
Yeah. Well, David, you met me at a period of my life when I was very impetuous. I'm a little less so than I used to be, but I like the expression of let's hasten slowly. We've got to find a way to actually do something interesting. But look, there have been great chapters, and as I said, we're still in good health. Let's see what else we can do.
Yep. Oh, we are.
We are.
Yeah.
So, David, let me then thank you for this tremendous journey that we've been on together since 1989. It has finished technically with Transfield Holdings, but it hasn't finished with me. So let's see. I'm looking forward to the next chapter.
Well, Guido, you were very fond of my late wife, Tanny, who was most unfond of Bruce Baird, and she often used to say to me, I hope you remember to thank Guido for the wonderful opportunities he's given you. It's changed your life. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Great.